The online dialogue series of Refugee Poets was commissioned by the Special Initiative on Displacement SIF program of the Civil Peace Service of GIZ. We appreciate the discussions and insights shared. The opinions expressed in these dialogue series are those of the speakers. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions or views of GIZ. Hello and welcome to Try My Shoe. I am thankful that you're here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for following through, and you have made it this far. So, karibu and congratulations. So, this program is made possible by JZ and JZCPS Special Initiative on Displacement. And today we have an in-studio audience. So I'm very excited for that interaction, as I am for your interaction on our social media pages, which are Refugee Poet and Anika Initiative. We have talked about so many things on Try My Shoe, and all the issues have been pertaining to refugees. And we have talked about education, we have talked about health, mental wellness, we have talked about a bit of policy and law, and today we are talking again about laws and policy in a different way. We have not explored this angle before. So our topic for the day is laws pertaining to refugees, laws pertaining to people who've been displaced. And my hope is that you and I both get to learn more things and unlearn our previously held misconceptions and ideas. So with me are amazing panelists who are going to introduce themselves, and I cannot wait for you to meet them. So karibuni sana.
Thank you.
I will start with you, lady. Kindly introduce yourself.
Okay. Thank you for having us. My name is Julie Matoke. I'm a human rights lawyer.
Thank you, Julie, for being here.
Thank you.
I am excited for this interaction.
Same here.
Hi.
Yes.
I'll say gentleman one for like the intro.
Thank you, Joy. My name is Ajak Jok Ajak. I'm a lawyer and a trainee advocate, and I'm also a refugee. So I'm glad and happy to join the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. I am excited for this as well. And you have been here before?
Have been here
You
before.
look very familiar.
Thank you very much for having me back here again. My name is Jamin Kuswania. I'm the advocacy manager for IRC Rebuild program that is looking at championing self-reliance for refugees and conscious that a policy and legal framework needs to be aligned if self-reliance is to be achieved and not a dream.
Yes. And I remember from our previous conversation we had, my takeaway points were developmental aid and not humanitarian aid. And that is the angle which I want to begin today's conversation from. How do we ensure development is not just a word that we use? First of all, how do we ensure development is realized for refugees? And first of all, what is development? Let's explore what is development and how can development be actualized or achieved within the framework of policy and law. Yeah. So we'll start with you, Julie.
Development for me is growth beyond self-reliance. By self-reliance, I mean over-reliance on donor funding and donor aid to the extent within which the refugees are able to, self-depend and continue their lives beyond the displacement or their reason for fleeing from their countries of origin. So how do we move forward towards realizing development? I think it begins with not just the country of origin, but the country of asylum. In our case, it begins with us, Kenya. How do we ensure we leverage relationships between the country of origin and the country of asylum being Kenya? And how do we then, foster economic realities, foster cultural engagement towards things that are supposed to build and help them feel at home so that they're not always feeling as the outsider, but they're also growing and probably even growing different aspects of their country, so that one day when whatever reason that caused them to flee destabilizes, they're able to go back without, and when they leave, so that because one day they will leave, Kenya
they
doesn't
want
feel,
to, yeah?
if they want to, Kenya doesn't feel like we've lost our main our main supporters of things like our economy, our cultures, or things like that. Or even if they decide to stay, how then do the relationships evolve and grow us as a country and grow the host communities who are us Kenyans?
That is what development looks like for you.
For me, yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Development. Doctors. Why I said that is because, again, your organization also helps in actualizing development past self-reliance. Yeah, but actually, no. I have a question. Yeah. So you mentioned self-reliance and said beyond self-reliance, yeah? Is self-reliance and humanitarian aid the same? Because my question to Jermaine was with regards to humanitarian aid.
Yes.
Yeah. So is humanitarian aid the same as self-reliance? So probably you can answer that and Jermaine can jump in as well.
In a perfect world where I see development working, I see self-reliance being totally different from humanitarian aid.
Okay.
And if it must be there, let it be to just kickstart your stay. But then what happens, say, if, for example, UN funding runs out, or probably if it is for a period of 2 weeks, what happens after 2 weeks? What happens if the camps are shut down like they want to in 2022?
Yeah.
And the fear of fleeing your country is still there. What happens if you decide to, stay in the country and probably, get an employment permit, just practical solutions, and you have to get a job? How do you self-sustain with the little support that you have then received? Because, quote unquote, depending on handouts too much is part of the reason why probably our government is having a lot of problems in terms of, knowing when they can kick them out. They're more or less controlling their lives too much. Yet migrating because of different reasons should not be the reason for you to be denied your basic rights as a human being.
Yeah, plus also we help to break down stereotypes attached to refugees.
Very true.
Yeah. Jermaine.
The self-reliance and development aid are the synonyms that we talk about here. And it is a departure coming away from the humanitarian aid that we have had for a long period of time. And the reason we are championing for self-reliance is because we know we have had protracted refugee situations in countries for many, many years. And that dependence on humanitarian aid is not sustainable for refugees, either within their residence in the host countries that host them, or even preparing them once they go back to their home country. And therefore, countries need to make sure that we have enough policies in place that are able to foster self-reliance amongst refugees who have been displaced. And the very earliest convention on refugees, 1951 convention, was also cognizant about that particular fact. That yes, we will have, as she said, we will have refugees who will come and run away from their countries. They will require humanitarian aid to be able to stabilize. But that should not be an end in itself. We then need to begin working towards processes of making sure that they are economically included within host countries where they are, to be able to support themselves and even grow the economy where they actually belong.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you have mentioned the 1951 convention as the earliest convention with regards to settlement. Is it refugee settlement?
The codification, refugee issues ran way back into the ages.
Okay.
But the very first codification of refugee rights as we know them today is the 1951 convention. Though earlier, the 1948 United Nations Human Rights Declaration of 1948 speaks about the right to asylum being Article 14. But then it's until 1951 where we have now codification of laws, which is the 1951 Convention on Refugees, and then speaks about what are the rights and obligations of both refugees, what are the rights and obligations of states that host refugees, and what is it that countries are supposed to make sure that is in place so that they can be able to host refugees and able to be in a position to sustain them, even beyond self-reliance.
Okay. So now I wanted to take that stride into 1951, 1948, and Ajak, kindly walk us through international law with regards to refugees and persons who've been displaced. How far back can we go in history, and what laws were in place then and have been in place till now? So take us through history and help us unpack that in in less legalese as possible.
Okay, thank you, Joy. I'll try to be less legalistic as
I
much as
mean,
possible.
your colleagues will definitely chime in and help.
Yeah. So, okay, approaching it from the angle of historical laws is the fact that the first actually legislation to talk about refugees was the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It was only just single article within, because it was covering a broad of rights. And so the only article that is relevant to refugees was Article 14, which basically say in simple terms that persons who are fleeing their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of persecution have the right to be granted asylum to the country where they have fled to. Yeah, and it does not give us the framework upon which how to deal with refugees when they have been received in the country of asylum, and how they are supposed to relate with the host community, and whether they can be incorporated or integrated into the entire country or to be encamped. All those details are not provided. And so the substantive refugee law is the 1951 Convention and the 1967 Protocol. Yeah. So the convention basically broadly defines what refugees are and who can be granted asylum. So that is what it does, and it basically covers everything about refugees' rights and how they can be treated within the host country, the criteria to be used to determine those who should have the refugee status and those who may be rejected.
Okay.
Because it also talks at Article 33 on the persons who may not be rejected and the persons who may be rejected. For instance, if you ran to Kenya as maybe you are a spy, the Kenya has the right to actually refund or to reject you and say we don't want you. Yeah.
Okay.
And if you come, you have committed terror attacks in the country of origin, they have the right to say no, we don't want you, and they can actually extradite you back to your country. So those it comes with a broad framework on how to actually relate. The host country can relate with refugees and how it can do about them, but it does not specifically specify specific like such as encampment, because some are left to the host country to actually come up with the laws and regulations on how to govern the refugees, because states are independent, and so each state is required to actually come up with its own laws on how to deal with the refugees. For Kenya, most African countries, actually, not Kenya alone, they prefer encampment than to incorporate. But in the Western or the first world countries, like what you are talking about, especially talking about human development and actually giving them a spade instead of giving them a plate.
Yes.
You see? So in the African context, refugees are hosted in a specific section where they are given only a plate.
Yeah.
But in the Western world, you are welcome, you are shown where to stay, and you are shown a farm and you're given a spade so that you can provide for yourself. So that will increase, that will reduce dependency. So you are able to actually fend for yourself and do everything for yourself. So 5 years down the line, you can even become citizen. You see, so that's what happened. And then there are, like for Kenya now, because we are talking specifically about the Kenya situation, they have the Refugee Act 2006, which gives the broad rights and responsibilities of refugees and how the procedures of asylum may be undertaken, such as the RSD, refugee status determination, how they should be conducted, and all those procedures. It is provided in Kenya. So basically, the substantive law on refugees is the 1951 Convention and its protocol of 1967. Thank you.
Okay. So convention is like a set of rules. Yeah. And so within this set of rules, this 1951 set of rules, Kenya signed and said, we abide by this set of rules. And then Kenya went ahead and said, we welcome people within our borders, and then introduced certain policies. So this is, you have mentioned the 2006 Refugee Act, but then you also mentioned encampment policy versus incorporation policy. So what policies have been in existence in Kenya? So I'll start with you, Jermaine. Kindly walk us through what policies have been in existence, and then we will take questions from the audience up till where we are right now, and then continue. Yeah.
The country Kenya, borrowing from what Ajaka said, is that countries have been at liberty to domesticate the 1951 Convention. The domestication of the 1951 Convention has been different from different countries.
Okay.
Some countries have looked at the 1951 Convention as just a recommendation and not obligations.
Okay.
And that's why that even when the 1951 Convention speaks about the right to movement and the right to reside, then respective countries have gone ahead and reserved some of those particular provisions. Egypt has reserved the right to public education and also the right to wage earning employment.
Okay.
And so coming into the country as Kenya is that we have an encampment policy, a departure from the 1951 Convention about the freedom of movement. And so the encampment policy in Kenya is simply that refugees are supposed to live in designated areas. These designated areas then are Dadaab and in Kakuma. The problem about designating the encampment policy is that then you restrict the movement of persons, you restrict the possibility of them attaining higher education, especially tertiary education, and you restrict them to be in a position to participate in opportunities that they can be able to build themselves as a country. And so the incumbent policy is one of the key policies that the Kenyan government has actually looked into and enforced over a period of time.
Okay. Since when do we have a?
We have an incumbent policy since I think 2014. In
2012? 22. Okay.
So in 2012 we had the incumbent policy, but we didn't have the designated areas. So until 2014, then now we had the designated area. After
Wait, sorry to interrupt again. A camp like Kakuma, I think it has been in existence since I think 1992.
Yes.
So then, what do you mean that there were laws saying Kakuma is an encampment area came into actualization in 2012?
The management of refugees in this country has moved from different law dimensions, if I could say. Initially, until 2006, when we had the very first act, we were still hosting refugees in the country. But then that was under the Ministry of Home Affairs, as we knew it then, which was under the Vice President. But these particular camps had actually been in existence.
Yeah.
So until 2012, then we had an introduction of the encampment policy. But again, we didn't have designated areas. I think it was courtesy of Kituo cha Sheria when they moved to court. And now we had designated areas, being the Dadaab and Kakuma, where refugees are supposed to reside. Though we have refugees in urban areas who have been the exception rather than the rule, and stemming from persons who are pursuing family reunification, persons who have security concerns that they cannot be in a position to live in those particular camps as we have them currently.
Okay.
In terms of the general policy on refugees, it is unfortunate that the country we have not had a policy to guide how we are to run refugee affairs. And the very first look-alike policy is actually the CRF document, the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, that was signed last year in October, but then we are yet to see the implementation of that particular policy, so that then ministries, departments, county government, and other sectors engaging with refugees know that this is the policy direction that we as a country would actually want to move.
Okay. I have so many questions from what you've said, which I will, I will extract. But once we have questions from our in-studio audience. Yes, karibuni. Please, if you have any questions, comments, something you feel we should touch on.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Eunice.
Hi,
and
Eunice.
I have a question regarding how countries have been securitizing refugees And I would give an example of Kenya and the US. For example, I mean, Kenya issued a notice the other day that they were going to send away the refugees, and they gave a 2 weeks notice. Now, my question to you would be, isn't that violating the international laws that they have signed by? For example, the principle of non-refoulement, I believe. So how should we go around like about that? And I mean, another example would be with regard to the US, when we had Trump, especially in Trump's era, where he used to separate the child and the mother, and the child is allowed to enter the country, but then the mother is told to go back, say, for example, if they come back from Mexico. So isn't that violating the international laws and treaties that they have abided by? And if so, how should we go about it?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your question will be answered by you.
Can I proceed and answer now?
Yes, please proceed to answer.
So two things, like Ajak and Jameen have said, states usually enjoy state sovereignty, but that does not mean that they get to enjoy derogation from their international obligations. I mean, except for the US, which I think did not sign the 1951 Convention on Refugees. Kenya did, and as such, you have seen, over the years, we have seen movements where Kenya has tried to forcefully return refugees back to their countries. And I think it was in 2007, 2008, just before they gazetted the designated areas. Previously, most of the refugees used to be hosted alongside the coastal region. And they were forcefully, one night, they were forcefully just moved and dumped somewhere in in Somalia. And after that, Kituo cha Sheria went to court, and there's a court decision on it where they were told you cannot forcefully reform refugees back to their country because it's a violation of your international obligations. Now, for countries who are members of such conventions, it is easier for human rights activists like Jameen and myself and Ajak now to actually hold the governments accountable through court engagement, through litigation. The other way countries can be held accountable is through largely through lobbying. And you lobby so that you can develop better policies, so that you can develop better laws. Your second question on Trump's actions when he was president, where he separated, where he tried to separate the children and the mother. One of the goals when someone is granted refugee status is to ensure family reunification. And I think there's a whole unit under the Red Cross and other organization on family reunification, so that children are not left alone and all those things. And you can see the kind of backlash that fell upon the US and how it almost actually tainted their international relations. Practically speaking, it is easier to enforce such implications on developing countries who are the largest hosts of refugees. For example, when Kenya has, for example, given a notice that they want to close the camps in 2022, then that means what the donor and the international community can do, for example, on the extreme is something like, impose economic sanctions to make them abide by their international obligations. And when you look at the migration over the past few years towards European countries and how people are being turned back and the kind of international backlash that came back, sometimes I like to call it bad manners. And sometimes if you call people out on their bad manners, they actually feel embarrassed after some time. So the international community in the European case, tried to make a bit of noise. And then I think other states realized that it was just bad manners and they had to call them out on it. And some of them have taken a step back in terms of, their border regulations and things like that. I think it was a few years back in Australia when someone set themselves on fire because they could not be given asylum and things like that. And so such movements, such reactions from refugees themselves, just trying to tell us, I'm a person like you. Be human to me, do not deport me. And I think a forum like this is one of those ways we engage and try to hold especially the developed countries accountable, because I know it is easier to hold developing countries accountable as opposed to holding developed countries accountable. But I also would like to believe that politics of the day and the politician of the day the political leader of the day gets to carry how engagement is. We have seen, for example, in the US, when Joe Biden became president, he's trying to make a big turn on a lot of immigration sanctions and laws that Trump had actually imposed through executive orders and things like that. And probably this is a call to us all as human beings to be very sensitive about who we appoint to office. And probably it is a call for us, Kenya, to have engaging conversations with the Ministry of Interior to see that move forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eunice. Eunice, is your question answered?
Yes, totally.
Thank you. I think I will take just one more question. If there's one. Is there? Okay.
Hi,
Hi.
I am Banak from Youth Voices community. My question would be, I would pick from what you said on in regards to self-reliance and all that. Yeah. So in when it comes to self-reliance, UNHCR has not set aside a microfinance agency that can support the refugees to be able to sustain themselves or to be able to get loans from, since the government does not give loans. So in that, how are urban refugees or just the refugees in general, how are they supposed to be self-reliant when the UNHCR itself that is in charge of these refugees has not set aside any microfinance agency to support their businesses? And on that also, UNHCR back in the day used to have a CTD, a temporary travel document, that the business class urban refugees would use to travel from one country to the other to coordinate their businesses. But of late, I would say from 2017 up to date, they do not issue that document. So in that, if they do not issue that kind of document, how are these business class urban refugees supposed to coordinate their businesses, supposed to travel? The other day, I had a friend of mine who had his goods all the way from Tanzania. But for him, his good was sustained at the border. But in order for him to travel from Nairobi to the border there, he need a travel document. He need a movement pass for him to go there. But if he doesn't have, that is definitely, he was unable to go and get his good all the way from there. He had to get someone, give him something small for that person to go and at least try to negotiate on his behalf at the border for his goods to come in. So in such cases, how are we to deal with the cases of this travel document and the microfinance issue for the business class urban refugee?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. And I will throw that question to you, Jamin. I feel like you're very well placed to answer that.
Thank you very much. On the first question on microfinance, I would say that the responsibility of hosting refugees is government responsibility.
Okay.
And so what needs to be in place, in my view, is that we need to have an inclusion of refugees within the systems that run in a particular country. And that economic inclusion then becomes, what are the structures that exist in a country to be able to borrow money to run businesses? And therefore, working on policies that will ensure that refugees are actually included in those particular policies. It may not be possible to have distinct tracks where you have a microfinance institution that serves this particular group and another microfinance institution that only serves Kenyan. Yeah. That in itself works to separate the divide that we should be then bringing it together. And so the question becomes that we need to push government to be able to ensure that we have enough policies in terms of financial access, so that then whether persons are hosts or they are refugees, they can be in a position to access financial products from the financial institutions that certainly exist. Yeah. In terms of CTD, the conventional travel document that was earlier called the nascent document, is that for a long period of time in this country, UNHCR has been taking the burden of hosting refugees and documentation and all those particular processes. But they have built capacity of government. And now government has taken over the responsibilities in terms of access to documentations and even the management of refugees away from what UNHCR used to do, which was an assistance role that they used to do to government. And then currently, the Refugee Affairs Secretariat, which is the government department bestowed on dealing with refugees or with the responsibility, issue CTD documents to refugees who would want to travel. The distinction would be that maybe the process takes a bit longer, and especially now that we have been having COVID issues, or maybe that the processes maybe are not a bit clearer to refugees, but the Refugee Affairs Secretariat has taken over that particular role of issuing conventional travel documents to refugees.
All right. Yes. Thank you for the clarification on also the separation from UNHCR into the government and how that has meshed. I hope your question has been answered, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will get into the next round of questions, but first I will come back to our panel. Okay, so Ajak, Jermaine said so many things at a go, and they had so many strings to pull, and so would you please help me? Number one, when we're talking about these documents and policies, how does a law then become a policy? Number one. That would be my first question. So please go for that first, and then I go to my next question.
Okay, thank you. Okay, what happens is that a law is supposed to inform policy.
Okay.
Because a policy is supposed to inform the governmental action or an action of the organization is supposed to inform them. And the existence of law is to ensure that whatever policy that the NGO or a government department comes up with actually complies with the law. The law does not restrict the generation of policies. It doesn't. It is supposed to actually ensure that any policy that is developed must comply with an existing law or must be within the framework of an existing law.
Would you please contextualize one policy and one law that has informed a certain policy?
For instance, for the government to actually adopt in 2012 when they started adopting the designated areas, you see, the designated areas policy came from the Refugee Act 2006. You see, they had to make sure that they are complying with an existing law, which was Refugee Act 2006, for them, which actually speak to the fact that refugees should be hosted and accommodated in specific areas, and that they are not allowed to travel outside them unless there are sufficient reasons for them to, like sickness or people who are going for higher education and such things. So that is how law informs policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got
so
it.
That's basically, so thanks.
Thank you. My other question again, you are having the burden of explaining what your colleagues have told us. So before the encampment policy, before say Kakuma and the Dabo established, and they said these are the designated areas for refugees to get into. We have just been told by Julie they were along the coast. And then one day they were picked up and placed in another place. So why is it necessary to have designated areas? And isn't the presence of these designated areas detrimental? So, for instance, you are within the camp, you're not supposed to be moving. Isn't this counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve? And why would Kituo cha Sheria push for give refugees designated areas, and yet it seems like you are setting apart people and saying refugees stay there and members of the host communities stay here?
Okay, thank you. The issue of encampment just was made to appear like it did not exist at some point. But if you remember, in 1992, that's when Kakuma refugee camp was established.
Yeah.
And like Jemina has said, these responsibilities, if before, I think 2012, they used to be handled by the UNHCR, yeah? And they had a little framework or policy framework that was governing them at the time. And there existed Kakuma and the DAFCAM as at the time. The other camps were not there. But when the refugees continued to increase, there was need now to come up with the laws that is going to govern how we are going to actually handle refugees in the country. That's how it came. There is a challenge as to whether refugees can actually be allowed to go any place. Number one, is the government or the UNHCR able to provide the services that they need across the country? That is one thing that made incumbent policy to be preferred compared to other things, because refugees are supposed to be provided for by the UNHCR. Before you become economically independent, actually the government did not have a policy whereby refugees can stay anywhere at the time. And UNHCR was the one who was providing aid through ration and providing them with tents and later providing them with iron sheet and all those things. So for you to just go and maybe let's assume I'll go to Migori and say, okay, I like this place, I want to stay here.
Yeah.
It will be so difficult for UNHCR considering the funding that they have for them to supply all these materials and the food to every part of the country.
Okay.
So for the UNHCR to be able to provide for these people, it was necessary in the first place for them to stay in the camps.
Okay.
That was the first thing. And secondly, the reason why now those who are economically independent, like those who are staying in Mombasa, these are people maybe who are able to actually have some businesses here and there. And then the government, to some point, maybe there must been a reason why the government actually decided to actually remove them and take them back to the DAFCAM. It is maybe because of activities that were going on there, and maybe the government felt like these people do not have business permits for them to conduct this kind of business that they are doing here. The government is not under any authority. It is the Grunom. Okay, it is.
Go for it. Tell me that name again so I can show off with it.
So the government is the Grunom. No one can actually tell them what to do. They're the one who decides what's to be done. It is the center of the law, and it's the one that decides. And the international community, the manner in which the international community come in to actually make sure Kenya remain faithful to its obligation is really challenging because of issues of sovereignty and independence of state. So it like Julie had said earlier, there are only specific things which like cutting donor funding and maybe backlash such things, and that will affect your economy in one way or another, because those who will come and invest here will start fearing, if you can treat refugees like this, how about me, someone coming to invest here, you see? So such things, they always come with they are the major challenges that the government face. But the government is the one, like in to take you back a little bit, in 2016, Nkaiseri issued so many directives regarding the closure of the DAFCAM. You remember? And there was a case that was taken to court by Kenya National Commission on Human Rights. They actually won that case because it was against the principle of non-refoulement. And if you look at the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, if you look at that commission, it is a constitutional commission.
Okay.
It is not an NGO. Yeah, it is a commission under the Constitution of Kenya.
Got it. Okay.
So basically, it means the government is actually contradicting itself. It is, in one way or another, is staying under Article 2, 5, and 6 that the international laws and conventions which we have ratified are laws in Kenya. And then it goes on again to actually violate them without coming up with a specific framework, or even saying that I am going to denounce this. I want to denounce the Refugee Convention of 1951 or such things.
Can we denounce the Refugee Convention?
If it can, and then they have to remove themselves from the Committee of State. Because the reason why you have such an obligation is that we have said, as an independent state, we have come together for the good of humanity and we want to do specific things.
Okay.
And that is why countries actually sign and say we are going to be hospitable, we'll welcome people into our borders and we'll treat them in specific ways. Yeah.
Thank you. So now, how do we move from encampment to incorporation come 2022 with the impending camp closure, given what you have just told us, the country just might be going against what they said. So they said we are opening up our borders and everyone is welcome and we are hosting everyone. And then all of a sudden they're saying people need to leave. You all need to pack up and get ready to move. So
Yeah.
are we going to be infringing on international law? Do we even care? Are there repercussions for infringements other than, I don't know, economic backlash and threatening people and saying we're not going to fund this one? And is there anything that can be done? So I have asked like 2 or 3 things, but how do we move? So I will start with Jermaine and then come to you, Julie. Okay. And if you have anything to add, you, Edrock, and then we'll go back to our in-studio audience.
So let me first clarify
that
the Kituo cha Sheria case that I had earlier mentioned did not call for incumbent policy.
Okay.
The practice then was that government was already restricting refugees to live within Kakuma and Dadaab. What Kituo moved to court to say is that the government has no mandate to restrict those particular 2 areas for refugees to be able to exist.
Okay.
Though the law spoke about refugees living in designated areas, we didn't have areas that were designated as such. And so then they were looking for opening up away from Kakuma and Dadaab. However, what the government did when they were faced by that, they just went ahead and now gazetted those areas as the designated areas.
Okay.
That were left open within within the Refugee Act. On your question, is that the principle of non-refoulement, and I'll explain it.
Yes, please.
Is that a country cannot return people back to where they came from forcefully. And that is the cornerstone of refugee protection. We are aware that in terms of durable solutions for hosting refugees, we have integration within the country, we have repatriation, which is going back to their home area, and we have resettlement going back to third world countries. That country. If repatriation is to happen, which is what the government actually was pushing for until 2016, from 2016, with the tripartite agreement between Kenya, the UNHCR, and Somalia, is that particular process has to be voluntary. Because then you will not return people where they came from if the situations have not been in a position to change. Especially moving from what our definition then of a refugee would be, that they are running away from persecution, and therefore you will not then return persons back for persecution where they have run away from. Yeah. The Kenyan government, in its effort to call for the closure of the camps, then must have options within their must have options on the table. Does the closure of camp mean that you reintegrate refugees to the rest of the country? If that is the case, then that is fine. If the closure of the camps means that refugees have to go back to their home areas, then it has to be voluntary. They have to volunteer that they want to go back home, which is safe and safely for them to be in a position to go back to their home areas. If the government moves and is in violation of the principle of non-refoulement, then refugee rights are human rights. And therefore, we would then have a government that is rogue and abusive to human rights. And us, as Julie said, who work in civil society, will then need to raise our antenna. Development partners will need to raise the antenna. And even foreign nations that are our development partners will also need to raise the antenna and condemn such action from government if government moves to that particular extent to actually actualize the closure of the camps with a forceful return to the camps. To their home country, Yes.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Just to carry on from what Jermaine has said,
we have to embrace the aspect of practicality in terms of the solutions that are available for refugees. And we have to start by the resettlement question, which is spared for the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. I know it's a lucrative solution, but it is meant for the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. And that's why third countries actually have restricted numbers. You'll get, like, for example, the US takes 100 or wherever.
And that's worldwide. That's globally.
And that's globally. And
partly, I mean, they're justified partly because they contribute to the fund that runs, how refugees are managed and supported in the countries that largely host them. When you come to the option of voluntary repatriation, like he says, I mean, a perfect example is the engagement between Kenya, Somalia, and the UNHCR, which has seen a very slight number of people go back to zones that have been declared safe and perfect for them, and with an aspect of support so that they can get to settle down. We come back to the option of local integration, which I have previously said has worked in countries like Tanzania, has worked in Cote d'Ivoire, and has worked in countries like in the West African region. And for me, in terms of practicality, I move towards the question of what then happens since, I mean, Kenya has hosted, I think, 2 or 3 generations of Somali refugees, for example. We have a pending crisis in Ethiopia. There's a lot of instability in South Sudan. And we could go on giving many examples. And for me, I would say before, up to 2022, we need to have a very hard conversation as a country and actors in the space on how we are going to move forward in probably implementing local integration, which currently seems to be the most practical solution for us as Kenyans. I mean, if we've had 2 or 3 generations of Somali refugees in Kenya, they probably intermarried with the Kenyan Somalis or probably other tribes. They probably moved into the urban region because of insecurity issues at the various camps and things like that. And do we then want to start having a conversation that has probably been had before in West Africa, where they have encouraged residency? And then after some time, if your country is unstable, you can go back. And if not, then you can apply, to become a citizen. And I know the question of getting citizenship is a very hard question because, I mean, a country needs to look at a lot of things before they can render that. But for me, probably I would say we need to move beyond, just this limited time frame of giving refugee status and reviewing, say, after every 5 years, and graduate to something a top-notch higher. Why not have, for example, residents, the way the Sierra Leone refugees were handed residents in West African countries, give them career pins, let them contribute to our economy, get the same economy money and try to safeguard things in our borders, build a good border, not the other border that you're building against Kenya, Somalia that has taken, I think, about 1 billion or more and has not been concluded. And let's use that money to encourage development in our country and actually foster peace at a higher level, because with the rate of instability across African regions and the kind of conversations that are being held at the AU, we need to find a solution and need to find a solution very quickly instead of passing on the blame game, I would say.
Thank you. Very solid action points. Like, I feel like asking you, where do you see yourself in 20 years? I feel like you have an answer.
Where do I see ourselves in 20 years as a country? I am very aspirational. So I look forward to a time in Kenya where Ajak here, because he's already is a trained advocate in Kenya, that I can actually appear with him in the Supreme Court to champion beyond refugee rights, where I look forward to a time where we'll have proper structures where, I mean, so you become a refugee, we review your status. If your country is more stable, let the residency continue. If I want to go back home, well and good. I can also stay in Kenya and contribute to both economies, which is what Kenyans in diaspora are doing. Instead of, you've not seen the US waking up and saying, if you have your proper papers, you need to leave the US. Yet they contribute. They're building the US and they're building Kenya. Why not benefit and leverage off things like that? I look forward to a time when families will not be broken up because the police have decided to raid houses in Isili like they previously did, for example, and mothers have been taken away, the children have been lost. I just look forward, I'm hopeful that we'll have a healing society that will embrace each other better.
Thank you. Your 20 years from now is so beautiful. Take us with you.
I hope we get there.
Thank you, Ajak. As you add on to this conversation, Julie has mentioned something. Has mentioned that she looks forward to be able to appear with you in court, representing matters aside from refugee cases. Would you talk to me about your experiences as a refugee who is a lawyer within our systems, within the Kenyan systems, what that has been like for you?
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Joy. To add on to what they have said, basically, there's nothing to add. Because the move by the government is, number one, illegal because it is violating an existing law. Number two, the procedures and the means which they have adopted to actually repatriate or to make sure that the refugees are no longer hosted in Kenya does not comply with the standard they have set themselves.
Yeah.
The Kenyan government has set a standard which must be met for repatriation or for when you are talking about third country resettlement.
Yeah.
They have already said those things and they are not complying with them. It's just like someone who get annoyed one day, maybe you are friends, and then maybe you do something
And they chase you out.
and then they just be like, get out of my house, get out. And you mean that. So that is what the government of Kenya is currently doing. So, and they have provided all the answers regarding that. As regarding my experiences as someone who studied law and now aspiring to be admitted maybe at the end of the year, this year, hopefully, is that, I was happy in Kakuma. I had everything. I used to go to school. When I come back, I go to the lager and play. That life was okay. But as you grow up, there are some things that you have come to outgrown because you become economically independent. For instance, I have worked in Kenya for the last 16 months. Was working in a law firm. And having that, you have never been able to actually earn for yourself, apart from the little when I used to work in the camp, which is called giving back to the community. Yeah, if you're teaching, you're basically giving back to the community, and you're given a token of appreciation for helping your own people. It was not a salary. But after graduating from Moi University and joining Kenya School of Law, I was employed at a farm. Okay, I was a pupil, but it was good enough to sustain me around Nairobi, rent my own place to stay, and cater for myself, and even help my little brother back in Kakuma.
Oh, wow.
You see such things. So it was really a good experience. But I have had difficulties accessing services because of some things that I had, like the refugee ID that we have. It is, in some way, it can't help you like the Kenyan ID that is issued. For instance, opening a bank account, it makes it so difficult. You have to go and ask permission from UNHCR. UNHCR will have to follow it up for you to have a bank account. And when it expires, it is another process.
Yeah.
And
which is
all
after
those
every
things.
5 years.
Every 5 years, you can't register. For instance, there's a refugee friend of mine who wanted to. He is a writer and he's a poet, and he write a lot of books. Like in a year, he can write 3 books.
Okay.
So good. He's so good. He's called John Pendangong, and this guy wanted to open an PayPal account so that his book can be sold online. So just like the case for Amazon, yeah. So those who are in US can actually access his book and buy them. But because he cannot register M-Pesa, he is unable to actually operate a PayPal account. And this one is really an hindrance. And this is someone who can, one, help Kenya by paying taxes through the books. If he sells his books, Kenyan government is getting tax.
Get tax.
Because the DST digital service tax, has been introduced recently. So Kenyan government will be getting tax from such kind of a person. Kenyan government, because I got my PIN last year in January, Kenyan government has been getting money from the little that I used to get where I worked, you see. So, and that's where I agree with Julie when they say that integration should be, these people should give us the go-ahead for integration so that we contribute, if we are able to contribute. Because it is not all Kenyans that are contributing to the economy.
True.
But there are few refugees who can contribute. Like this guy I'm telling you, and myself, and others outside there. I know there are so many. So my experience as someone who is able to do something and maybe provide something for Kenya and to get something out of Kenya has been difficult because of such restrictions. And I really feel like that's where you come and feel discrimination.
Yes.
When you are in the camp, you don't feel it when you are still young. You don't know
you
anything.
don't feel it.
But now when you grow up and you are becoming economically independent, you want to do certain things and then they are so difficult, you feel like, okay, I now see this is not my country.
Yeah.
You see? You really feel it. And there's nothing you can do about it because the government has no policy in place. So you can't blame the institutions that are offering services. The government has said you don't need to do this, especially the banks. So I don't see if the government see that refugees are the threat to this because they are the money launderers or what, because it is the Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2009 that actually restrict refugees from using SIM cards to register them with Safaricom and
Okay.
M-Pesa. You see, such things. So and it's really not good. It's not a good experience that I can say, yeah.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. I mean, it means much that you are able to tell us your story because, again, I aim to humanize people. This whole conversation, I aim to humanize it. I aim for people, for my audience to be able to say there's a face to these numbers. There's someone who's actually facing this discrimination, and he's a whole lawyer who can contribute to the economy but is unable to. He has to jump through various hurdles, and so thank you for sharing your story. We're going to pick questions, and then as after you answer them, we're going to we're going to pick questions after. I'm just thinking about time. As you answer the questions, then we will do a round of closing remarks. Thank you so much. This has been very helpful. So, my in-studio audience, we are going to pick.
There's a gentleman's hand.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can't quite see. We're going to pick your questions. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Dolaga George. Speaking of closure of the refugees camps and possibly maybe forced repatriation, we do understand that Africa and perhaps East Africa is looking towards the integration, political integration, and perhaps economic integration. And we can also talk about the inter-African trade. That you see, there's the principle of reciprocity. Let's say every state is in the verge of perhaps getting into a political instability, and maybe which will force its national to be a refugee. So does Kenya consider such future implication of maybe forcibly repatriating refugees? Secondly, we do have the political economy of refugees. We do understand that a lot of aid workers depends on livelihood of working maybe closely with with UNHCR. Let's say I can predict over worldwide over 5,000 workers depend on refugees. That's where let's say even Kenyans, we do have Kenyans who work with UNHCR, which yeah. So yeah, we need to consider such implication of the incumbents law, which will have like global implication or regional implication.
Yeah, thank you for your question and comment. So I will pick one more, just one more, and then we will get back to the panel discussion because someone has told me we're running out of time.
Thank you. Once again, I'm Banak. Talking of the integration of the refugees, one, how are we going to integrate refugees when they cannot even get the work permit for them to be able to sustain themselves with around? Yeah, it is hard for them to be able to get the work permit because the class M definitely translates to someone being a refugee if you apply for it online. It shows that you are a refugee, so it's none of the concern at the immigration over there or online. The other thing would be even the students who are finishing up with the university studies. If they try to go and apply for interns anywhere, it is hard for one to apply for intern. Let's say our lawyer over there, it is even hard for him to be admitted at the law chamber of Kenya because the documentation are not even recognized by the Kenyan government. If it's recognized, it's only recognized by a few, not all, not entirely the Kenyan in general understand the documentation of the urban refugees. So how are these people going to be able to get interns in such institutions? Like right now, they do not have that opportunity of getting intern. They have to go to the immigration, get some documentation, so pay for that documentation so that they can be able to move with that document to apply for the intern. So in that situation, how are they? How are we going to survive? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that question. Thank you, my in-studio audience. You guys have been amazing. You have brought matters to the surface, and thank you very much. Thank you for your contribution. So there were 3 questions. So you each get to answer one question of your choosing and throw in your closing remarks.
I can go first.
Yes, you can go first.
So thank you very much. The local integration in itself is dependent on various aspects. It's true, refugees have been in this country for many years. Some we are talking about second or even third generation refugees in the country.
Yeah.
For local integration to be achieved, therefore, because it's actually one of the options of the durable solution, is that as a country, we need to make sure that the policies that are in place are able to accommodate refugees within the country. Since local integration will mean that refugees are independent of themselves, then our financial provision laws, our laws in terms of access to work needs to be changed to be in a position to make sure that refugees can actually be accommodated. That's actually where we need to begin.
Okay.
Secondly, the private sector need to be sensitized enough that they can be able to provide opportunities to refugees. And I'm an advocate of refugees being included, not as a favor. Give them an opportunity. If they can be in a position to participate or if they can be in a position to contribute within the economy, then let them be in a position to contribute. The third aspect is about perception. An index, a perception survey that was done a few years ago, I think it's 2017, actually painted that Kenyans have no problem with refugees being integrated to be Kenyans.
Okay.
And so it has become more of a government policy and not the threat that we speak about that Kenyans will not want to accommodate refugees or not. If anything else, then they have accommodated refugees for the last 30 years in this particular country. And so when we have those 3 aspects then in place, we will then be laying the foundation for local integration of refugees. Foreigners who have been in this particular country under Section 17 of the Citizenship and Immigration Act of 2011 is that they can be in a position to have resident permit, and after 7 years they can apply to be naturalized and become Kenyans. That particular provision has not catered for refugees who have been in the country for 20 years or even for 28 years. So we need to treat them equally, which is actually what the convention, the 1951 convention actually speaks into, so that we can be in a position to integrate them into the community. My parting shot is this, that government needs to find what works for the government and what works for refugees. In my submission, incumbent policy does not work for government. It does not work for refugees. It does not work for government because they do not contribute to the economy of this particular country. Yeah. It does not work for government because then they have refugees in far away quarters in this particular country, and then we have criminals who take advantage of those particular camps to be in a position to perpetrate atrocities that we see. If that was to be removed and refugees are integrated and can be in a position to exist within the communities, then we don't have a place where you'll say that terrorists hide in these particular areas. It doesn't work for refugees because they remain dependents. Someone born 28 years ago in Dadaab has only known Dadaab over this particular period. Yeah. They cannot be in a position to provide for their families. While we know that government can provide all the basic services for those particular refugees, not can the United Nations actually provide for those particular refugees. And therefore, enabling them to be in a position to be independent is the only call that we need to. And even as he asked the question, when we are moving towards integration of the East African community, we need them to look at that. What does that mean for refugees who come from this particular region? They need them to be given resident permits and be in a position to live in this particular country, contribute to the country, and also be in a position to build themselves up until that particular period, that they are able to go back to their countries and be able to contribute to the building up of their nations.
Thank you, Jermaine. Ever so insightful. I like how you move from legalese to corporate to the actual situation on the ground, it is very fascinating. So thank you. Ajak.
Okay, first to
an
answer
answer
his
and-
question
yeah.
first is the Refugee Convention is very clear that, especially on issues of the right to education, including because internship is attached to education.
Yeah.
It is part of your educational program and is supposed to be provided to refugees like Kenyans. Yeah, because the Refugee Convention says that refugees have the same right to education as the nationals. But when it comes to working now, that's when it says, okay, they should be treated like foreigners when it's come to working.
Okay.
So basically, that is discrimination, and anyone can actually go to court on the basis that they are being discriminated because of their identity as refugees.
Okay.
Yeah, and under the Kenyan constitution, group identity has not been specifically specified as one of the grounds for non-discrimination under Article 27. But it's one of the things when if people are moving, like Jemen has said, if we are moving, because we are now going to come with a policy where we are talking of integration. If we are talking about integration, then some of these things will have to change. And then Article 27 will have to identify, maybe because of group identity, one should not be discriminated because of a group identity.
What is a group identity?
Like refugees, they are
Okay.
a particular class of people or group of people, yeah? So the identity as refugees should not be the basis for discrimination, and they have to enjoy that right. So that is one of the things that we should consider. So if anyone is, it is just within because there are some companies, like where I worked, or I run company advocates, they have non-discrimination policies. So, and because you apply like 1,000 students from School of Law, and they will have to pick a certain number from you. For them, they pride in that globalization because they see that this is one Africa and they can take from anywhere. But some small companies, they will definitely discriminate.
I like how you said some small companies.
Yeah, because these big companies, they have a big heart. That's one thing I've learned over the years. And so if you really want to actually do your internship, don't go for these
Small
upcomings. Yeah? Don't go for the upcoming ones. Just go for the Ivy Leagues, what the law school call it, the Ivy League companies, because they like that international aspect of the grouping. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I can say. My parting shot, I believe the rest to Julie. My parting shot is solution based, and it's something that has been said over and over again. Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the problem with the camp is the government is saying the people from the host community are not supposed to intermingle with the refugees, and the refugees should not intermingle with the host community.
Yeah.
In fact, if you are from the host community, you have come to trade in the camp, and then a specific time as region you are still in the camp, it will land you in problem. Like if you are from Turkana, let's say in Kakuma, and you have stayed in the camp until 8 or 10, that will cause you a problem. The police are going to arrest you, like you have come to cause a problem. And this is one of the things that is really affecting refugees, integration. People should be allowed to interact, and people should be allowed to make friends. If I've met a friend with a Turkana friend, like I had a friend called Lele, I stayed with him in Lodo in his father's house for 1 month. Yeah. And I took my brother there at some point before I took him to Lodwar High School. So you see, this kind of friendship, they should be allowed. But because in Turkana there we are seeing like there's not much difference, that's why we were able to stay peacefully. But when my brother came to Eldoret, he was taken back. They told him that we need a work permit and all those things. Yeah, you see. So now that interfere with his education, and they have to renew work permit every 6 months. Yeah, every 6 months.
Work permit.
No, sorry, travel permit. Travel permit every 6 months.
Doesn't even get better.
Yeah. So and that one is really bad for some people who are students. Because you're coming out of school, you give them your refugee ID. The Askaris, they are not even aware of what is this. They say, which document is this? Oh, Kakuma. You're supposed to be in Kakuma, ingia ndani. You see, you're taken in because of that. So such things are a big problem. And James has really put it succinct that it does not benefit both the refugees and the government of Kenya.
Yeah.
So integration for Kenya is the best solution. And if they think that the numbers are so huge, because they say it is over 800,000 now, if the numbers are so huge that they cannot incorporate all such numbers, then they should at least talk to the other countries. And the UNHCR are going to do the lobby for them, and so that there will be third country resettlement. So that is what I can suggest. But just throwing people out of the camp is not a solution.
It's not a solution.
Yeah, it's not a solution.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you, Ajak. Thank you for sharing your story. That was very insightful. It is a story on resilience, and it is very beautiful. So thank you even for telling us about your brother as well, and for shedding light into matters, policies and politics, and taking us back into history. And now it has been a pleasure hosting you. Thank you very much.
Finally,
Yes, you.
I believe in a holistic approach in finding solutions, and I believe for us to implement local integration, we need to move beyond finding solutions as quote unquote lawyers and human rights and humanitarian workers in the conversation. We need to incorporate economists, political scientists, and whatnot view to get a holistic approach that's going to work for Kenya. I think once we find this holistic approach, for my case, I support local integration. It is easier for us to demand the principle of reciprocity amongst the East African community and even across Africa as an entire continent. So like I said, I look forward to better days 20 years from today. I hope we will not be having a conversation of refugee crisis in the country. And I hope we will be having, conversations about fostering peace in their respective countries and probably rebuilding. And if we fail to rebuild like we failed in South Sudan, we go back and rebuild again and have a transitional society that has become better. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It has been a pleasure hosting you. I like how forward thinking you are.
I'm a very practical person and a very aspirational person.
Thank you. It has been beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, you three. This has been very beautiful, very insightful. I have learned so much. I didn't have a lot to unlearn because I really didn't have any learning. I didn't have any knowledge around this field. But now, thank you. It's clearer for me, and I hope it is for you, my audience. I hope this has been as insightful for you as it has for me, and the interaction with the in-studio audience and our guests as well has been a beautiful experience. So do tell us what this has been like for you. Talk to us about your experiences. Comment and recommend our pages on our socials, which is Refi Poet and Anika. And thank you so much for being a part of this journey. And thank you, GIZ CPS Special Initiative on Displacement. Thank you for enabling this. My name is Joy Chenyenyozi, and I am so thankful that I got to have you as my audience listening in and watching. And I look forward to continuing this journey with you. So take care of yourself and be safe. Bye.
The online dialogue series of Refugee Poet was commissioned by the Special Initiative on Displacement SIF program of the Civil Peace Service of GIZ, We appreciate the discussions and insights shared. The opinions expressed in these dialogue series are those of the speakers. They do not necessarily reflect the opinions or views of GIZ.